Welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Our theme today is the relationship between open source and wearables. And our guest, Geoff Gill, is president at Shimmer Americas. Geoff, introduce yourself.
Sure. Shimmer Americas, we do wearable sensors, primarily for medical and other B2B applications. And I run the US, but that's my day job. In my copious free time, I am a co-founder of the Open Wearables Initiative, which we often call OWEAR, which is designed to help facilitate and encourage the use of open source algorithms for wearables, in particular for medical applications.
Well, that's definitely an interesting perspective because most medical devices I know are very closed source and they hold very close to the chest in terms of what their code is, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what's your background? How'd you end up at President of Shimmer Americas and being co-founder of, and I love the term copious free time because that essentially means, like myself, you don't have any. Um, how'd you come about to this position?
Oh, well, that's a very long story, but I'll try and shorten it to make it somewhat interesting. So I started out, I have a degree in applied math and physics from undergrad, and I started my career in what was not what we now call data science, basically algorithm development and analyzing data. Back in the day, we called it numerical analysis, and got involved with that. Then went to business school and kind of went on the business side, but always kind of combining technology and business, and ended up being involved in a number of startups. I guess I'm now a serial entrepreneur, and the latest one got me involved with Shimmer Research, which I guess is maybe not a startup, but it's a small company that does wearable devices, and was really brought in to help get us into some bigger markets than we were currently in, and the medical field is probably the biggest.
Oh, certainly. I mean, everybody needs healthcare on some level. And speaking of that, obviously everybody hears about the pandemic because it's constant and persistent, and it's probably our new way of life. But how has, the last 18 months or so, how has that, COVID kind of changed the way you work, and how has it impacted Shimmer with the industries that you're targeting?
So in terms of how we actually work, didn't strangely impact us very much. We have facilities in Dublin, Ireland. I'm in Boston, and we have a team in Malaysia. And so I spend most of my life on Zoom. I guess the big change there was we kind of moved from Skype and GoToMeeting to Zoom. So not a huge shift there. In terms of the industry, it's radically transformed the industry. There's been a whole shift in how clinical trials are run, which is our primary focus, to moving much more towards decentralized virtual trials, as it's sometimes called. And it's kind of both been disruptive but also brought a lot of attention on ways to assess people's health remotely, because you can't always just bring them into the office to see how they're doing. So a lot of short-term disruption. Long-term, for us, it's actually been a very positive direction. Just accelerated something that was going in that direction anyway.
Well, I want to put a pin in that for a minute because I think you said something very interesting with the remote monitoring of health, and I want to explore that deeper. But first, as I mentioned when we brought you on, we very much like to hear the human side of things on this podcast. What is something that you're passionate about that has nothing to do with work?
Well, I guess really just my family, my wife and my kids. I adore them. They're great. I have 3 kids, 1 wife. and
One
so
wife.
yeah.
That's probably a good choice.
Yeah. Well, at least in the U.S. at this time, but
Yeah.
yes, and probably a good choice even if I weren't in the U.S. So yeah, no, it's great. Strangely enough, the pandemic has been kind of nice on that side. Both my wife and I are doing almost all our work from home now. And so we each have our separate offices, but we get to go down to the kitchen and we call it the cafeteria. And we sometimes meet at the cafeteria to have lunch. So it's been great to have more time to do that and more availability.
Yeah. So a little about me here, command prompt. I found a command prompt back in 1997, and we've been fully remote since I think like '04 or something like that. And my wife and I also have always worked from home, and it's interesting because we work, hobby, and play together. And at times, some people, we've talked to people and they're like, I don't understand how you could do that. And it does take a special relationship. Is there any challenges that you had? I mean, did she work from home beforehand, or is the pandemic caused her to work from home? How did you have to adapt?
Yeah, it's we both worked in an office full time beforehand, and we also traveled periodically. Maybe once a month or something like that. So it's been quite a relief to be able to kind of just stay at home and do all the stuff that we were doing anyway. I think for us, it's a little different that we're working in separate companies, so we're not working together. So we both have our offices, and they're private and they're separate, and that's actually worked out well. So it's not quite the full on relationship that you have at 24/7, but so far it's all positive, spending more time together.
I think it's great. I wish that more families could see the benefit in being more tight knit. We in the States, we kind of gone through this culture shift where um, you're supposed to have two working parents, and you send your kids to school, and then you're ferrying them to whatever after hours, whether it be soccer or football, whatever. And then you come home, you have dinner, and then when's family time? When is bonding? How do you actually teach your children if you're all spending so much time away from each other? Now, and that doesn't just suggest it has to be 24/7. I know, for example, our producer Lindsay Hooper had a very interesting family life, and that her life was a little more communal, where she had multiple adults in her life, even though her parents, were together the whole time. Whereas myself, as I was growing up, I came from your traditional destroyed '80s family, so I'm not going to even go there. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it really put a sense of importance as I raised my kids. My kids are all almost grown now. I have one daughter left that's 16, um, and really kind of changed our direction and our purpose in terms of focusing on family first. Right, the career is important, but the reality is the moment you have kids and the moment you have a partner, they come before your career and your accolades and your resume. And I've seen a lot of people struggle with that through their own personal ambition. Okay, let's move on here. You said you're president of Shimmer. Shimmer is building what?
So we make wearable sensors. So, you can kind of think the thing that everyone thinks of when they think about wearables is like the Apple Watch or Fitbit or whatever. Um, and we have some that kind of look that way, but we our sensors, we have a whole platform of different sensors, and they can be put in different parts of the body. They can measure things other than activity and sleep and those types of things, other than even heart rate, we have a sensor that measures something called thoracic bioimpedance, which is basically measuring the level of resistance across your lungs, which is an indication, first of all, you can get really good respiration data from that, but you can also start to even talk about things like measuring the amount of fluid in lungs and that type of thing. So there's a whole range, and some of them can be integrated into like fabrics and into shirts or which have electrodes built into the fabric. Others, can be worn on your ankle or your upper arm or your head. We just got an inquiry today about someone wants to put an IMU sensor on someone's forehead. So it's like we can do that. So it tends to be very, very eclectic what we do. And what a lot of people I don't think completely understand is that for medical applications, medicine is going to be an incredibly large market, but it's going to be made up of a whole bunch of tiny niches that tiny is relative, maybe $1 billion niches, but very small, specific things that they're measuring. And so that's where we play. We don't play at all in the consumer market, or, that's why no one's ever heard of us.
So you're not doing Fitbits. You said just when this caught me, you said inside the body. So I want to clarify, you have sensors that are internal, you can have externally, of course, but also internally.
No, we do not do any internal. Those would be called implantables as opposed to wearables. But we do measure by putting electrodes on either side of the lungs. We can actually send a very, very small electric current through there, and measuring that measures the resistance that it encounters, and that gives you a measure of what's happening inside.
So, I mean, basic science, has told us that, the body does have for lack of electricity, energy, whatever, running through it. And what you're saying is that you have the ability through a wearable sensor to measure how much, you had mentioned fluid is in the lungs.
Right.
That's I'm sitting here a little dumbfounded, right? I get I can measure my heartbeat, I can and those types of things. I understand that, but how does one measure the amount of fluid through the resistance between a very low pulse of electricity between two electrodes?
Well, basically, we can get quite complex here. You have sort of a spatial approach, which looks at so fluid is more conductive than air. So when you breathe in, the amount of air in your lungs increases, and so the resistance increases. When you exhale, it decreases, and so the resistance decreases, and so you can measure that impact. Now, if you do things like there's a carrier, as it turns out, there's a carrier frequency that you use when you inject this. If you vary the carrier frequency, if you have an array of electrodes, you can start to look at the spatial configuration of the resistance, and that's how you would get to the fluid in the lungs. It's not a simple trivial calculation, but it's something that can be done.
So, first off, I am not trying to oversimplify the technology in terms of what it's doing. I do very much understand that it's intricate, but what would be, since we are talking specifically about the lungs and impedance in the lungs and fluid in the lungs, what is the practical application there for medicine? What would that data help me determine?
Well, so if you think about chronic heart failure, is basically fluid in the lungs. So if you're able to measure the amount of fluid in the lungs, and also respiration, heart rate, there are a number of different factors that you could include in here, you can build a model and potentially identify when that person is starting to go south before even they feel it, and well before they are readmitted to a hospital, and you treat them with Lasix and you solve the problem without them going to the hospital. And this is a huge problem. Now, I throw some statistics at you. So a little over 6 million people in the US have chronic heart failure. The total cost is somewhere in the 40 to 50 billion dollars a year to the country. The mortality rate is very high. I think it's 23% of people with chronic heart failure are readmitted to a hospital within 30 days of release. So if you can start to fix this with like a $200 or $300 wearable and intervene ahead of time, you can save billions in costs. You can, and probably more important, you improve the person's life, because being readmitted to a hospital is not a good thing under any circumstances, and you have the secondary infections and all sorts of things. So for really short money, you can actually change the whole sort of outlook here for the person and for the economics of the situation.
Okay, so and I'm not trying to oversimplify here, but what I'm hearing is that in this particular circumstance, it's kind of like the pacemaker, right? Where the pacemaker, you can have a pacemaker installed that will help keep your heart rhythm doing what it's supposed to do. In this situation, you have the ability to preemptively, or not even preemptively, more like proactively manage the condition, because you have these sensors, and therefore you're reducing, probably not eliminating because it is chronic, but
right,
reducing the readmittance to the hospital quite a bit.
Yes, exactly. And go ahead.
That of course creates a better quality of life. Also, I assume would also decrease the mortality rate because it becomes a semi-manageable condition.
Yeah, I would think that it would decrease the mortality rate. Well, almost certainly it would. Chronic heart failure is not a not a good thing. So
No.
Hey, it's you want to avoid it, but it is gives you the potential to manage it much better.
Interesting. So, as I've been in the technology industry since like 1990, 91, something like that. And so I kind of came up through, the internet becoming a thing, even though it had been around for 20, almost 20 years by then. But the internet actually becoming a commerce platform. And now, as technology has moved forward at such a degree, we're starting to see things like, when I use my phone, I didn't even ask it to do this, but my phone tracks my steps through the day. I don't have a wearable. It's just in my pocket, and it'll tell me, hey, you did so many steps. Good for you. And it's like, thank you, you demoralizing piece of plastic. But it's terrible, right? Because you'll pick up the phone at the end of the day and it's like, here's 100, you did 150% of your steps. And then you're like, ooh, but then there's the days where it's like, you did 12% of your steps. I'm like, that's because I wasn't carrying you.
Yeah.
It's very judgmental. I don't know what to do about it, but I do see a benefit as a whole to using technology, not only to increase life. For example, I need a new ankle. I didn't even know you could replace ankles, and you can replace ankles now.
Yep.
But there is a concern because privacy is a huge issue now, right? It's always been an issue, but it is now at such a level because the internet has turned the person into the product, right? You no longer sell a widget, you sell a person's habits so that you can get them to consume more. And that's a very dangerous thing. How do we, with these types of devices, without, obviously, I'm not looking to give away secrets here, but there's got to be some kind of protocol. Obviously, there's regulations like HIPAA and stuff like that that ensure some privacy. But we were on the phone with a breast cancer oncologist researcher back in the beginning of the year. And one of the things that she struggles with is getting the data that she needs. She has to like download it from a spreadsheet and then cross correlate, and there's no centralized databases, and there's no way for her to say, show me cancer rates in this zip code to see if there's a hot spot, and then you might be able to correlate that to, say, a former toxic chemicals plant that was buried or whatever, right? The With this, isn't there a similar concern? I mean, how do you make sure that Joe Johnson doesn't all of a sudden have the world know that he has a chronic heart condition because of this sensor?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's really important to draw a very clear distinction between the things that are being used in medical applications, which are all covered by HIPAA, and the data that's generated by consumer wearables. And the consumer wearables, quite frankly, is kind of the Wild West. And I think regulations and everything are starting to catch up for that. And I think whereas actually I would argue, as in the case of your researcher, that we may be overboard on the HIPAA side, because there's incredible value of sharing data and being able to look at large quantities of data. If you look at clinical trials now, I mean, one of the challenges that they face is each one has to do their own data. They have to do what's called a placebo arm, which is basically an untreated, set of people, and another arm, the treatment arm, where they're actually giving people the test drugs. Now, do they really need to do a placebo arm? Couldn't they just compare their treatment with a generic placebo arm, effectively, a group of people? So if you have 20 drug companies doing 20 different drugs that are treating the same condition, they could potentially all use the same. But instead, they basically each have to do their own placebo arm, which is very, very expensive. It's not great for the people who are in the placebo arm, because they're not getting a treatment. And so there's a whole series of issues around that. And so I think that for and we're very much in the medical side. So the data that we would do will probably end up eventually in the patient's medical record, but it doesn't kind of stop in between. I mean, it gets transferred and moved into there. If someone breaks into the medical record, they will know that the person has chronic heart failure. They'll know an awful lot more about them than the wearable. I mean, they'll have the complete medical record. So the medical records are very tightly constrained. And whereas, you have the consumer wearables are just generating this data, and there's not very much constraint on that. So it's, big distinction between those two.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, obviously, anything in the health industry is heavily regulated, and I would also agree with you that HIPAA is working against advancement of care in certain circumstances. It's interesting. A few years back, I had a stent where I weighed too much. And when you get in your 40s, if you don't stay active, you end up in that condition. And I went to the doctor. I was just doing a standard checkup, and I saw on my sheet, medical record sheet, where she wrote obese. And I thought to myself, I'm only 25 pounds overweight. I'm not obese. Now, technically, I was obese. But it's kind of that particular situation. I think that people are holding on to, and I as well, to their privacy a little too much here. Because when you think about the greater good, what do you care that on a piece of paper it says you're obese? You can look in the mirror, you're fat. You need to drink a little less beer and eat a lot less pizza, right? This isn't a secret. Everyone around you knows you're fat. So why does it matter that it's in your record? And of course, there's more sensitive things than obesity, but I was using that as an example because it's something that happened with me. But how can you advance healthcare? And these sensors are part of the solution, right? But if you can't share data, right? Your placebo argument is a perfect example. You essentially have created, let's call it 12 groups of people that are trying to treat high cholesterol, for example. And that means you have 12 groups of people who are likely candidates for a heart attack and dying, who are not getting treated because we have to have 12. These companies can't share data. Now, there is the argument that these companies, they want to have their own patents, they want to have their own drug be the best drug. But if you only I don't know.
So there are a couple different questions there and a couple different issues. So one is I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't be sharing people's personal data connected with their personal information. All the data we have, and for example, in our products, we never know who the person is who's actually wearing the wearable. They have a participant ID, which is some code that's given to them, and there's nowhere in our system where we actually have their name, address, anything that could identify them. And that's fine, because somewhere else in some other system there is in fact an identifier, and there is a table that links them with that, but you can't get at that from our system. And for our purposes, we don't want to know that. And so we're actually pretty strong about making sure we never know that kind of personal information. And there's they call it pseudonymizing the information. So there is somewhere a way to link this to other information, but you can't link it directly within that system. And I think that's where we have to go. There's really the participant in the placebo arm I talked about. Those are pseudonymized participants. So it is eventually possible, and it has to be possible, to go through a series of systems to identify the person, because you actually have to update, because they'll have follow-up maybe over 5 years on some of these things. And so you do need to kind of know that, or you have to be able to get there. But there's layer upon layer of protection of that. And so it's incredibly difficult, for a hacker even. Let's forget about it. The companies can't do it. They can't use that information, or gain access to it. But even a hacker, has to go through several breakdowns to connect the information that is being generated by the wearable and the actual person. And so that's really pretty secure. And I think we can manage that. I think, again, the consumer stuff is not in that category. And that's something that I think is potentially much more vulnerable.
Well, I would agree. I mean, with the wearable, the stuff you can pick up at Best Buy, let's put it that way. A lot of people have gotten into this idea, and it measures heart rate, uh, basic assumption of calories burned, all those types of things. And that's certainly good information to have for yourself. But what they don't realize is that information is being collected. And there's an astounding amount of assumptions that you can make from even the smallest data set that allows you to target a consumer.
Yeah.
And I think most people don't realize this. I mean, even some of the brilliant people that I know, and having an Alexa in your house, right? There's a reciprocal relationship with an Alexa, right?
Yep.
And it's and again, I think it's cool that this technology exists, but I don't think people actually understand what the cost of that convenience is.
Right.
And with the wearables that are not medical, right? They're basically hobby wearables that give you some level of medical information.
Yeah.
There's a reason that's happening. And I wish that people would pay a little bit more attention to what is actually going on. There's this reason why when you're talking about something, all of a sudden the next web page you go to starts showing ads for it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not magic. It's actually math.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
No, absolutely. I mean, and in my mind, because we actually do some work in what's called the neuromarketing sphere, so I'm a little familiar with that as well. But in my mind, there's a very broad distinction between um, understanding people and sort of then using it against them, or taking advantage of that understanding. There's a whole field of effective computing, and where they're trying to make computers more empathetic. And you can talk, Alexa, helps with this, and helps, makes your life much more convenient. But it's taking that information and then using it in a way that maybe the person who's involved doesn't understand, and is wouldn't necessarily feel totally comfortable with. I think that's where you can get into real issues.
Yeah, let's shift gears here, because part of this the wearables and the medical devices, you're also a founder of OWEAR, which is the open source wearables project, or open source wearables initiative. Talk to me, who else is involved with that initiative?
So we have a number of people. There's, from the pharma side, there's like Pfizer, Merck, J&J's gotten involved a bit. A whole series of pharma companies, Eli Lilly, Novartis. So all the big names there are involved. Then there are some what are called CROs, or clinical research organizations, and these are companies that actually run trials. They're involved in, and then we have a group of work closely with a number of different industry organizations. There's the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, the Digital Medicine Society, and so forth. So a pretty broad range in the industry of people or organizations that are involved in this.
And talk to me about why you went. It's open wearables. It is when you say this, are the designs open, or is it the code that works within the wearables open, or yes?
No, it's very much the code. It's specifically the algorithms. And so if we kind of step back and say, all right, how do you get an algorithm, or how do you know that you're measuring something that's useful in medicine? And there's a validation process that has to go into that, and you basically need to validate that you're measuring something accurately, and then you need to convert that to something physical, and then you have to show that it's relevant to the particular disease you're measuring. So it's kind of like a three-step process. It turns out that's a lot of work to do that for even one disease. And the problem is, if you think there are literally hundreds of wearables out there, and they all have their proprietary algorithms, and they if you think about going through this process, which might cost millions of dollars to do this validation on each wearable and each proprietary algorithm for each disease, and then even different cohorts within a disease, it's the sort of the combinatorial math just explodes, and it's completely impossible. But so before Shimmer got involved in the clinical trials and this particular aspect of the industry, we looked at this and we said, this is just not going to work. Proprietary algorithms, won't work because of the combinatorial math, but also because the real customers of this, the pharma companies, the FDA, need, and actually doctors themselves, they need to understand what you're measuring. They need transparency. So all of this said to us that this is just not going to be a viable thing for every company to develop their own algorithms to measure basic things like, is someone getting better or worse in a particular disease?
I was going to say, so this is interesting because what I'm hearing, because I'm in the open source world. I've been, I'm using Linux right now as we speak. I've ran Linux as my primary desktop for since like 1995, 96. And I'm also well in depth in my company. Command Prompt is deep into Postgres and basically full stack support and consulting. And one of the things about open source is you get peer review. If each company is developing their own algorithms and there is no peer review, you can't honestly trust that their algorithms are worth a damn, right? And
Absolutely.
but what you're talking about is companies build your products, love your products, great, awesome, make as much money as you want, but the data that the algorithms to build the core components of, for example, testing for this disease, is someone getting better or worse, that can now be peer reviewed amongst the best and the brightest, and we can ensure a more proper outcome.
Yeah,
exactly. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We actually, so Shimmer makes the actual wearables and all the software that interconnects, and there's a tremendous amount of differentiation that you derive there, and fit for purpose and so forth. But the algorithms themselves we use for our, one of our algorithms there's a package called GGIR, and this is just a standard way of measuring activity and sleep using a wrist-worn accelerometer. Now, this has been in the last 5 years, there are over 300 peer-reviewed articles that use this. It's been validated on literally hundreds of thousands of participants in controlled studies, all peer-reviewed. It's transparent. And so that system is more validated than any other system in the world, any other wearable algorithm, as far as I know, and it's all clear and available to people. No company can do that. Certainly not little Shimmer can't do 300 studies, each one probably costing a couple $1 million on average. That's so we use that, and we, allow our customers to have total control over the version of the algorithm. What people don't realize is, every different version of watch is going to have a different algorithm in it. So it's, so if you use, Apple Watch 7 or whatever it is, this year, and then next year the new Apple Watch that's available is 8, you don't know it's the same algorithm. You don't know if you're getting the same data.
That's absolutely right. And if you don't know if you don't know that you're getting the same data, you can't rely on the calculations that the data are providing.
Right. Exactly. It's this is the reason, and that I mean, the customers of this, eventually, the FDA, the European Medical Association, and the pharma companies, they don't care really about the algorithm. They're not going to make any money being able to determine whether someone's getting better or worse from, chronic heart failure or whatever. They are making money off the drugs and the treatments, and we're just monitoring the people. And that's the thing. So they want transparency in that, so that they can rely on that data, because otherwise they have nothing.
Well, right, because if they can't rely on the data, they don't even know if the drugs. Well, I mean, let's talk. I mean, a real simple and quite funny, and extremely profitable mistake with a drug was Viagra, right? Because it was originally it was designed to be a blood pressure medication, and the side effect ended up being clearly very profitable. I mean, I don't think there's any argument. I mean, it fixed. Yeah.
Hugely profitable.
Yes, hugely profitable. The kind of profitable that you can imagine a CEO, rolling in the dollars, literally. It's just ridiculous. But you couldn't rely, if you don't have a proper data set, you can't rely that was safe.
Yeah.
Right? They wouldn't have been able to come to market with the switch from blood pressure medication to erectile dysfunction medication without being able to reanalyze the data and knowing that the data they had was canonical and valid.
Yeah, and it's even, we talk about, it seems very simple measuring whether someone's getting better or worse, but back when I was young, actually in college, my brother became a surgeon, and he told me, at that point, that, well, there's only one way to measure whether some treatments work or not. It's 5-year survival rate. Like, that's the measure. It's like, well, the problem is that may have been the measure back then, but today the measure is much more difficult. It's people, because you're dealing with chronic diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all these diseases that everyone survives 5 years, and so now you're really looking at how well is that Parkinson's patient moving. And that's a much more complex thing, and they have good days and bad days, and so it's really important to have consistent data there, because if you take steps as a measure, and there have been studies done where the output you get from a steps algorithm based on the same exact data can vary by 40%.
When you say steps, you're talking about monitoring if you got your 10,000 steps.
Right. Right. Yeah. So one possible metric for seeing if people are being more active in Parkinson's patients is, how many steps are they doing? Well, if you change your algorithm, you can just totally change the results of your trial. And but the point is, it's really tough in a clinic. If a person's having a good day and you run them through a standard test, they look like the drug's working great. But if you get them on a bad day, it looks like the drug's failing, and in fact, making them worse. It's because there's so much variation. So you need the sort of longevity of it, and you need to be
Well,
able to rely on that and having very consistent data.
well, that, and there's also something that really, it seems like the medical field is just now, starting to recognize in certain areas, which is quality of life, right? Certainly, if I take an aspirin and my headache goes away, that was effective. But in something like Parkinson's, like you said, you don't, they may or may not be getting better. And you're right, 5 years is nothing. I mean, look at when Michael J. Fox was, diagnosed, and how that's been 20 something years or something like that, and he's still going. But it has gotten worse for him. He's had to retire from acting because the symptoms are too powerful now. But you can also look at things. There's a quality of life that should be integrated into the care. And I would think that these sensors actually could help with that, right? With Parkinson's, right? Let's call it a tremor sensor.
Yep.
Is there an algorithm that we can put into a sensor that is a wearable that allows us to determine something that the patient may not, right? So a patient knows I've got these tremors, and they may know that the tremors are bad, but they may not know that they're getting worse as well as the wearable would, right? Because the wearable could sense down to the microns.
Right, exactly. I mean, and it's over time. I mean, so there are standard questionnaires of patient-reported outcomes to measure these things. But typically, they're basically asking you on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling, or how bad are your tremors, how bad are this? And first of all, that's really tough for patients to answer, because you're right, it's really hard, and they typically answer for the last day or two, and so you aren't really getting a good sense of that. But we actually work with a company that uses our wearables, and they've developed an algorithm. There's a treatment for Parkinson's, drug called levodopa, and if you give too much of it, it actually creates its own tremors. So you have to figure out the dosage of that. Well, this company using our wearables can distinguish between levodopa induced tremors and Parkinson's tremors. And so those two, being able to do that, there's no way a patient can figure that out. But through machine learning algorithms, this company is able to take data and able to do that, and then allows the physician to dial the medicine back, as opposed to kind of being trial and error in terms of, well, how, do I need to give them more because the tremors haven't gone away, or do I need to give them less because the tremors have changed to the levodopa-induced tremors? And so that's the kind of precision you can get with this that you can't get with by asking people.
So you just touched, and we're starting to close up on time here, but you did just touch on something that to me is the most ridiculous question. The scale of 1 to 10. And this is why it's a ridiculous question. I want to follow up with something because you've sparked an idea. Here's an example. I go to the doctor, and I'm 48, so my ankle, which needs to be replaced, it always hurts, period. Right? And for them to ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your ankle feeling? Well, I can still walk, so it doesn't really matter, right? But where this is important is that my wife has HEDS, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And what that essentially equates to is chronic pain. Now, it has a bunch of other issues, but the issue that we're dealing with is chronic pain. Now, she goes to the doctor and and the doctor says, "What is your pain level today?" Now she says 8. Now here's the problem. One, she's a woman who they traditionally have higher pain tolerances. Two, she's a redhead. Genetically, she has a higher pain tolerance. Three, she has chronic pain, which means an 8 to her, you and I are on the couch crying, begging for our mothers.
Yeah.
But she is still walking around, cooking dinner, and tending the garden or whatever the case may be. It's a scale of measurement of it's literally of irrelevance. I don't even know why they use it. It should be something more. It's something different. Now, my question is this, and the idea is this: is there an algorithm or is there a sensor? Because your body reacts to pain, right? Is there something that do you know of something that can be measured in a body automatically, mathematically, so that we can say, yeah, she's, I don't even know how she's walking, right? Because this mathematical algorithm has produced a result that says, if this was a normal, you know, and I shouldn't say normal, but, an average woman just walking down the street, it's 0, but with her, it's a 9. And we need to address that. And then obviously through that measurement, through various medications, the level goes down. Do you know of anything that's measurable there?
Well, definitely. I mean, getting an absolute measurement of pain, I'm not sure that that's possible or even relevant, because, people's brains actually adapt to pain. So
Right.
but there are things, there's a specific measure called galvanic skin response, which basically measures the activation of sweat glands. And that's very sensitive to pain. So we have a sensor that does this, and occasionally I do demonstrations. And if for some reason I'm not being active, or my nervousness or pain, whatever is not active enough, I will pinch myself to get a response. Okay, so there are definitely things that you can do there, and now, again, this starts to be relative, and it's a physiological response to pain, and a lot of other phenomenon as well. And so you have to figure out how to take that, and this is where the algorithms come in, right? How to take this fact that you can actually measure that people are feeling pain, but what is the algorithm? Is it the size of the bump? Is it how do you figure that over the course of a day, and do that? And we'll get there. There's no question in my mind we will get there. But it turns out it takes quite a while, and this will it'll take quite a while to develop this algorithm. But then there's also the validation. I mean, one of the things that I often talk about with people in algorithms is, like, if you have a data set and you have an outcome data set, a sensor data set and an outcome data set, it probably takes a couple of months for a data scientist to build an algorithm, or a machine learning expert to build an algorithm that maps those two really well. And if the data sets are broad enough, you've got an algorithm that can actually be extrapolated. So it's not the algorithm that's the problem; it's the validation, and that's where the Open Wearables Initiative really tries to come in. Is to say, let's not try and compete on these algorithms. Let's just try and have the algorithms there. Everyone share them, and what's more important is we share the validation.
Well, and that's again, that's the power of open source in general, right? Is that there's hundreds of Linux distributions. Everyone's working together on the core of the platform, the kernel, the Linux kernel, the main utilities that are underneath, because there's no intrinsic extra value there. You're not going to productize that. What you productize is the user experience, right? Or you modify it to work within a specialty piece of hardware, like say an auto computer or something like that, an IoT device. And that's where the money comes in. And I assume for Shimmer, that's the interaction, right? Is that the opening of the data just makes your Shimmer's ability to make a more reliable product, because the very nature of the algorithms you're implementing and into these sensors are actually being peer reviewed by your competition.
Yeah, exactly. And that's very nice and succinct way to put it. I mean, I think there's so many other things that are important that we can compete on. Let's just let's have our basic measures be public and open, because that's the only way we're going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that a lot of people, historically, people hold on to whatever it's intellectual property is what it is. They hold on to intellectual property very deeply because for some reason there's this ownership feeling that if I don't own it, how can I monopolize it or productize it or something like that. It's actually a good example of this is that command prompt, anytime you do business, you have a contract of some sort, right? Even if you just click agree and you never read it, which is what most people do, there's a contract in place when you conduct commerce. And in our contracts, it's very clear that if we develop something for you, as long as it's not a trade secret or been deemed confidential, because obviously you want to respect that, we get to reuse that code. Right now, we don't get to compete with you, of course, that wouldn't be fair, but it allows us to never have to reinvent the wheel.
Yep.
And that's the power of open source.
Yeah, and quite frankly, we do a lot of custom development for our customers, and generally we end up, if it's general purpose, we negotiate our contracts up ahead and say, look, we'll do this for you and this will help you with your problem, but you're not in this business, we are, and this is general purpose, and so we typically give them a break on the price and so forth, but we're going to we have to be free to incorporate it, because by the way, you're benefiting from all the work we've done for other people that's now part of our quite large library of software and other algorithms and so forth for wearables.
Exactly. And it all ends up the idea being greater good, right? Including making money, right? There's nothing wrong with making money. And I think a lot of people forget that, money is not evil, right? Money is, it's just a tangible item that allows us to assign value so that people can eat and have homes or whatever. Now, as we wrap up here, you mentioned way back in the beginning of the podcast, you used a term which frankly gave me the shivers. And it was neuromarketing. And I'd like you to explain what neuromarketing is.
Well, basically, neuromarketing is using psychological techniques, neuroscience techniques to understand consumers better. And I can totally understand why it gives you shivers, because it is possible to go down this path and use neuroscience techniques to understand individual consumers and then change how you interact with them. I think that's a path we don't go down, and in fact the market research industry doesn't go down that generally. So we will do studies with people. We actually don't do the studies. We provide equipment that allows other people, equipment and software to allow other people to do their own studies. But our studies are like a focus group or something like that, and we'll be gauging their psychological reactions to a TV ad or something, and not with the intent of selling them more stuff, but with the intent of understanding whether that ad's engaging to people. And because that's, hopefully that ad will become more effective. And so
But
that's,
isn't,
go ahead.
I got to ask, I mean, and to me, so oh, isn't that itself a manipulation though? I mean, obviously it, it's good to make an ad that attracts a person to do whatever, whether it's to go outside or to buy a widget. Okay. But in that, it's also possible, and you can see it happen, to derive information to elicit a response that it gets underneath into some underground, not underground, but like under layers of bias or whatever. And you end up manipulating the person in a certain direction, right? The perfect example, neuromarketing, regardless of censors or whatever, is political ads.
Yep.
Political ads are all lies. They're all lies, and they're very, very well written lies to elicit and create a response from whatever position you're on. It doesn't matter if you're liberal, Democrat, whatever. All that's irrelevant, because every single one of them is lying to you to get you to vote for them. And you can see it through history. The honest politicians do not get elected. So isn't that, I mean, isn't there an ethical boundary there that can be a little, not even a little, that's very concerning?
Um, I think I mean, you could say this about any research you do, right? That you're trying to figure out what resonates with focus groups or with people doing surveys, which are done ad nauseum and so forth. And so I think, you know, I think, as with all things, as we talked about, Alexa, that there is, there are some boundaries that you don't want to cross. Now, what I would say is if we're not, from my perspective, there's nothing different from running a focus group where you talk to people and using these techniques on the same focus group to understand them a little bit better and to understand a different aspect of what they do. I don't see that as qualitatively being different. I think as soon as you switch over to going after those individuals themselves, then I do feel that's where that's kind of the bright line that I in my own mind draw. But I think it's worth. I mean, I know the industry is looking at this as well. I think that it's something that people can should be concerned with and should look at. I think the there's a lot of work on the behavioral side, which is another aspect which we don't get involved in. I mean, that's where Facebook and these other companies are using huge amounts of data about yourself personally, the choices you make and creating assumptions about that. That to me is far more scary than trying to sort of extrapolate from a group saying, look, this is what we think the what will be more entertaining and engaging with people.
I would agree with that, and let me be very, I would really agree with that. The um, and that's actually what I was concerned with. It's not the focus group idea. I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable to do research to make sure that you have a product that people will want. Uh, and I think it's also perfectly reasonable to have groups of people to monitor. Uh, you know, did their heart rate go up when they saw this scene or something? Is it too much? Was it too violent? Whatever. I think that's fine. My concern was leaning more toward the idea of, and I said it earlier, where the person becomes the product. And
Yeah.
in society today, one of the things I say to everybody, it, because I participate in Facebook on Facebook and in social media just like anybody else. But the reality is this: if you didn't pay for the news you are reading, you are the product, and it is likely lying. Because their job, when it's free, their job is to elicit clicks for advertising so they can get paid, which means you get headlines that, they elicit responses. It's like when you're going down the highway and there's an accident, you can't help but look. Right. That's why, even though the accident's not even on your side of the highway, everybody slows down, because everybody has this morbid fascination with the fact that someone might be dead on the side of the road. And that's what they're doing, the Facebooks and things like that. And it's not, you really got to wonder what the end result will be. And as you know, I mean, Wall Street Journal is calling it the Facebook papers. The fact that Facebook knew that Instagram was negatively impacting teens, and especially teen girls. They knew this, and they capitalized on it.
Yeah.
That is the scary part of that type of research. But I digress, because I'm sure you and I could go on a long time about the evils that can be when you're talking about things like social media and advertising.
I mean, this is something that we need to grapple with. I have my own personal bright lines and about this, but I think that we as a society need to grapple with it, because it's clearly damaging to our society, at least in my opinion. So we need to figure it out.
Well, no, let's be clear. It may be your opinion, but you are correct. It is. As a father, 2 daughters, I can literally visibly see the behavioral changes in my daughters when they are allowed access to social media versus when they are not. I can empirical data analysis. I mean, it's just, you can just observe it, and it's toxic. And I actually moderate a couple of a Facebook group and a couple of subreddits. And rule number 1 is be nice. You don't have to agree. I don't care if you agree, but you're going to be nice and you're going to be constructive. If you're not, I'm going to ban you, because the world is already evil enough. I don't need you to be evil to the other people in the community.
Completely agree. I mean, I think it's, we need to have more of that kind of understanding that when you talk to people online, you're talking to people. You're not, it's not going on to some electronic ether that, you aren't hurting anyone.
That's right. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. Is there, I mean, it's been great talking with you, and I really actually, as you're a father, as am I, and clearly you love your wife, which you'd be amazed how many men don't. Actually, you probably wouldn't be amazed. You probably it's astounding. It's astounding to me the number of relationships that I've seen. And I'm not talking about new relationships that are trying to figure themselves out. I'm talking about relationships that have been going on for 20 years where they clearly just don't love each other.
Yeah.
Right? They're just, it's almost like they've just gotten into this placid lifestyle where, well, she's my wife, or, well, he's my husband, or whatever. But, and I would love at some point, I know you're busy and I'm busy, maybe we can chew the fat as husbands and fathers, just different perspectives, right? But is there anything, that you'd like to say before we close this up?
I think the potential is out there. I think we need to the privacy issues and all those things, we need to address those, and those got to be upfront. But we also need to have a balance, because the potential is, there's tremendous societal good and that's possible, and individual good. So I think we just need to be dispassionate and look at these issues and try and find a good ground for them.
Fair enough. All right. This has been More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future.